the idea too is that a certain amount of chaos has to be brought into the order in order for it to be fruitful, and you can see that in the form of allowing in the water. And out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So two trees are marked out among the rest. One is the tree of life, and one is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, you know when you read something like that, if you're thinking about it, that you're in a metaphorical space. Now, we've got to be careful about metaphors because, I could say and did that the chaos order idea is a metaphor, but then I also said, well, wait a second, it's a metaphor, but it's also what your brain is adapted to, and so, let's just not be pushing the idea that it's merely a metaphor too hard. And the same thing is happening here. These are metaphors, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But that doesn't exactly mean that they're mere metaphors, because sometimes, as I mentioned before, if you have a set of things and you abstract out from them a common element, you can make a strong case that the common element is more real than the set of things from which you abstracted it. That's the whole utility in abstraction. Why would you bother with it otherwise? If you can't take a set of things and say, look, there's something in common across this set of things that's more important than the differences between them, then you wouldn't bother abstracting at all. And so the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil are abstractions. Now, one of the questions is, this is a tough one, man. I tried to figure out for a long time why a fruit and something you eat would be associated with the transformation of psychology, because that's basically what happens in the Adam and Eve story. Why would it be something that you eat? Now, Eric Neumann, who was one of Jung's students, had written a fair bit about this and got a fair ways with it. And he said, well, we've noticed forever that the act of eating, especially if you're hungry, especially if you're starving, produces a rapid spiritual transformation, right? I mean, some of you, this is worth knowing, you probably have a crabby partner or child, because everyone does. And one thing you might try is that if they get erratic during the day and get all volatile about nothing at all, just give them something to eat. Really, I'll tell you, man, this solves. I do this with my clinical clients all the time. It's like they say, well, I fly off the handle at the littlest things. It's like, okay, yeah, just try this for a week. When you're crabby and unreasonable, eat a piece of cheese or eat a peanut butter sandwich. Eat something that's high protein, high fat, and then just wait 10 minutes and see if you're sane. And you'll find out that you're sane after you eat so often that you just can't believe how crazy you are when you're hungry. Look, it's really absolutely bloody remarkable. So I'm telling you, try this. It'll especially if you don't eat breakfast. This will change your life. And so here's a practical bit of information for you too, for all of you antisocial types who are going to end up in prison. So if you're in prison, and you want to go on parole, okay, so you have to go in front of the judge and tell him why you're not going to do it again. So here's the deal. It doesn't really matter what you did, and it doesn't really matter what you promise. What matters is whether you see the judge before lunch or after lunch. Because if you see the judge after lunch, the probability that you'll get parole is 60% higher. Yeah, right. That is just like... So never have an argument with your partner when you're hungry or when they're hungry, especially if you want something from them. It's like, here's a sandwich. They'll eat it, then they'll be happy. Then you can manipulate them. Before that, man, no. So, it's not that unreasonable to think that there's a spirit in food, because food rejuvenates, and it just doesn't rejuvenate you physically, it rejuvenates you spiritually. And then, of course, there's the other things that we consume that aren't exactly like food, that have a walloping spiritual impact, like alcohol, let's say, which is a spirit and is regarded, it's Dionysius, right? I mean, it's the god of the vine, and the god of the vine possesses you and makes you act all the fun ways that alcohol makes you act, the fun ways that you regret the next day. And so there's the spiritual element of that too. But there's something even deeper that I think is so cool that's associated with food and information, because the story of Adam and Eve represents the fruit as producing a psychological transformation. And so the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is an abstraction across trees, and it's trying to say, here's something that's common across trees. It's a fruit that's common across trees. It's something like that. And so the fruit that's common across trees is something you might call food. Fair enough, that's a generalization. But here's something that's even more cool. The food that's stable across the entire domain of food isn't food, it's information. It's information. And we use the same bloody circuits in our brain to forage for information that squirrels use to forage for food, that animals use to forage for food. It's the same circuit. And why is that? Because we figured out that knowing where things is, knowing where the food is more important than having the food. And so knowing where the food is a form of meta-food. Information is a form of meta-food. And once you, well, that's why we're information foragers. And so once you grasp that, and that idea is embedded into the story of Adam and Eve. So whatever it is that they ingest is a form of meta-food. It's information. And you know, we'll trade food for information, right? So if you're stuck on the edge of the highway and you know, your hood's up and your going places thing has turned into a pile of junk that you don't understand, and somebody pulls up beside you and they're a mechanic and they point to something and say, well, just put that wire back on there, you'll immediately give them a sandwich, right? Or you'll offer them something in return, you know what I mean? Because they've provided you with information that has value. And it has value because it actually provides you with energy, because information provides you with energy, because otherwise why would we bother with it? And so food provides energy, but so does information. And so there's the idea of food that you abstract from everything you can eat, but then there's the idea of what you could abstract from all sources of food, and the answer to that would be information. And the trees that are being referred to in Adam and Eve are these meta trees. They're not ordinary trees, just like paradise is no ordinary place, just like Adam and Eve are no ordinary people, and just like the logos that God is using at the beginning of time is no ordinary conception. And they're not metaphors, they're more than metaphors. I think of them as hyper realities. It's something like that. They're more real than what you see. They're more real than the reality that presents itself to you. And lots of things are like that, right? Numbers are like that. We wouldn't think or abstract if there weren't things that were more real than what we can see. So what's most real? Well, that's partly what we're trying to figure out. And out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into 4 heads. That's produced a tremendous amount of speculation. Now, you know, the Garden of Eden is also the holy city. That's another way of thinking about it. Or it's Jerusalem, right? Or it's the ideal state, which could be the ideal city, or it could be an ideal state of being, or it could be the ideal psyche, or it's all of those things stacked up at the same time. Right? And this is a Mandela, and this is the Mandela form that people, what would you call, hypothesized that constituted the structure of paradise. You notice it's got this cross form. That's Eden itself, and there's the center of Eden, and there's the rivers. Those are rivers, not snakes. Those are the rivers that go out of it. And they're turned into these Mandela images that are representative of what Jung described as the self, which would be the center element of being that he associated, of conscious being that he associated with divinity, I would say, but also with the idea of the holy city. And so I'm just showing you that to show you where the imagination has taken ideas of paradise. So the name of the first river is Pison, that is which compasseth the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. There's bdellium and the onyx stone. And the name of the second river is Gihon, the same is it that compasseth the whole land of Ethiopia. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel, or Hiddekel, I don't know. That is it which goeth towards the east of Assyria, and the fourth river is the Euphrates. So there's this strange intermingling there of geography with mythical geography, right, which you see happen fairly frequently in the books. And the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to dress it and keep it. Okay, so that's a good command. That's what you're supposed to do, is take care of the damn thing. It was a lot of work to make, right? It took a whole week.